So hello and welcome to today's webinar, where we will be discussing how you can secure your supply chains and empower your customers with TimberChain, which officially went live last week. This webinar is being presented to you jointly by Preferred by Nature, IOB 42, and Carl Ronnow. We have a fairly full agenda today. We will be talking about why TimberChain was created, what the service and its functionality looks like in practice, what the impact of TimberChain already is and could be in the future, and how organizations can learn more and get involved. Finally, we will end today's webinar with a question and answer session. Now, a few housekeeping items. First, we want this event to be as valuable as possible for all of you, so please feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat throughout the webinar. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A session at the end. And for those of you just joining us, a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, and please remain muted throughout the webinar. And if for whatever reason you lose connection or need to rejoin the webinar, you can re-enter by clicking the Zoom meeting link that you should have received when you first registered for today's event. So hello, my name is Kiara Kealoha, and I am today's moderator, and I'm very happy to introduce today's speakers. First, we have Adam Grant from Preferred by Nature, an international nonprofit organization working to support better land management and business practices that benefit people, nature, and the climate. Then we have Anna Roberts and Chris Remar from IOB 42, a technology provider that has developed a trust-building identity platform for users to create secure and sustainable business solutions. Last but not least, we have Dick Anning from Carl Ronnow, a global timber exporter specializing in the supply of tropical hardwoods and temperate species to the Middle East, South Africa, Asia, and Europe. So a big welcome to all of our speakers, and I'm very much looking forward to our discussion today. Before I hand it over to Adam, I am going to launch a quick poll for the audience right now. And it's asking what your views are on how new technologies in the timber industry can have an impact or not. So please answer honestly. Nobody in the live event will be able to see who answers how. And this is really just to kind of set ground level for today's event and give the speakers a bit of an idea of where the audience is coming from. Okay, so more than 50% of us have voted, so I'm going to close the poll for now. And as we can see, we have a bit of a mixed audience, although maybe most of us are leaning towards being already a bit open to the idea of using technology in the timber space. And I think it's good to have a bit of a mixed view on this, because the whole point of today is to engage, share information, and really open up the discourse about innovation in the supply chain space. So thank you. And you can close the window of the poll if you're still seeing it on your screen. So now that we know where the audience is coming from, Adam, could you please tell us a bit more about Preferred by Nature and what motivated you to collaborate with IOB 42 on TimberChain? Adam, you're muted. Thank you.
Good start. Yeah, sorry about the first slide. This isn't a sales pitch, but just so you know who Preferred by Nature are, if you haven't come across us already. We're a certification body certifying against all the major environmental certification standards across the globe in about 100 countries. So we have a good grasp of the certification world and supply chains, and so that's why I just bring this slide up to sort of set the framework for why we are working in this and what our thoughts are, so you understand where we're coming from. Next slide, yeah. So really, so why do we do this? It's much more around, you know, the trust issue. What is the trust issue we're trying to answer by doing this? If we, as I say, we work heavily in all the certification schemes, and you know, they've done a great job, and they continue to do a great job up to this point. They've set great frameworks and changed the way we do business. I was a timber trader back at the end of the 80s and 90s before anything's happened with boycotts. and I knew the free fall it was then, and then the boycotts, and then into certification. So that I could see the evolution over my career to where we are now with these brand-based, paper-based certification schemes, the FSC, PFC, the Agricultural Standards Rainforest Alliance. But, they are still a paper-based system with the inherent problems and the centralized controls of the way they're doing it and the way the data is controlled. So we're looking at how things are evolving, what's available in the marketplace, the exponential growth in information, computer processing, and available data. So the thought was we're not really using that well enough. So we have to sort of evolve how we're going to do business. And blockchain's there, and it's the way to hang all of these new developments on place. And you're seeing the internet developing probably on a block-based system. So that's why we're trying to explore this and get involved. And to answer these trust issues of, next slide, please, Gail. The trust issues, but how do we do that? And what are we planning to do? And this is, I can feel skepticism across the board for some of this already, but this isn't necessarily a linear progression of just closed shop, but the idea with the trust issues is to open up it as a network effect. Development of things in the past has always been on a linear progression, much like Murphy's Law in computer programming. But with the way of the evolution of technology, it's things are much more based on network effect. Things are measured in Metcalfe scale if you look at it that way. So we're keen to explore how we bring in the blockchain, but also in partnership with everybody to create some open networks and partnerships. One, to be able to scale this if it's going to work, and also for the veracity and control of data. We all know, things are only as good as the data that goes in. So this is why Preferred by Nature is working closely with IOV. IOV is the provider of the technology. Certification schemes like ourselves, groups like ourselves, or Soil Association, SCS, SGS can be the controller of the data that goes in through either third party or second party verification. Next slide. And so, that's where we start off with the trust issue with our thinking about this. Well, what is it we're trying to consider in the systems we have already? They're working, they have been working, but they need to evolve because of the data and the availability of computing, and everyone can see into the supply chains a lot easier. And you can see that potentially the chain of custody with the paper-based auditing and controls of data isn't good enough for today's technologies. Networks and how we're going to move forward is the way to do that, with verification and partnerships. But then, this is taking a real leap. I put this in here because I know this is, going beyond where we already are. We're already just introducing blockchain, but this is where I'm introducing the slide of where we think we'd really like to go is, get away from the centralized control where we are right now with the current schemes into the distributed or decentralized control systems of we're all working together, controlling the data and pushing it through the supply chains. And that would lead to a frictionless due diligence systems where one node in the supply chain will be working on their blockchain, then it will hand it on with all the information flowing through the system as a seamless, secure transfer of information. And then the thing that we're really aiming for, the thing that gets me excited, is smart contracts. And smart contracts is basically how the real world then layers on top of the blockchain. So when I'm talking about real world, if something happens in the world, a payment is required, or there's a storm, crops get damaged, then that real world activity then interacts with the blockchain and triggers a smart contract. And this in turn will help parts of the world that doesn't have functional infrastructure, Africa and Asia, the same way that Europe and North America does in terms of insurance and contract payments, corruption, and inflation rates that are 100% over each month. The smart contracts allow people then to leapfrog development and into EU or North America, or even going beyond that, and help them have smart contract insurance payments, often on-ramp for fiat payments. Fiat is in US dollars or whatever it may be. and insurance payments for crop transfers and these sorts of things. And this is what's interesting for us to go forward over the next few years to, one, get the blockchain going, and then create this network, and then get into the smart contracts. And we all work and live in parts of the world with different infrastructures. And if you're in Europe or North America, you're lucky, you're privileged. But other parts of the world doesn't have this. And so these smart contracts would hopefully help with bringing people up onto a level playing field. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam, for giving that helpful introduction and for setting up the context for TimberChain a bit more. So now I think it would be a good time to hand it over to Anna to tell us a bit more about IOV 42 and why you were interested in building something like TimberChain.
Yeah, thanks, Chiara. And it's a complete pleasure to be in this webinar this morning or this afternoon, depending upon where we're based. I think very, very important to say from the start that what we're trying to build with PBN here is in big gratitude to everything that's come before. So we know that there is a lot of great stuff already happening in the traceability space, in commodities, in timber, in the world in which PBN operates. And we're not trying to say that that's broken or you need an entirely new system. What we're trying to create is something that underpins all of the great work that's already going on and elevates it and joins it up. And we think the space is really ready and in fact ripe for transformation here. It's a hugely complex supply chain. It's very, very international in nature, crossing lots of borders, and it's increasingly highly regulated and has pressure coming from consumers and retailers, etc. I think everyone on this call, I'm sure, is very aware of what the ramifications are of something like illegal felling, illegal harvesting, and that goes much, much further than just the environmental impact. It has really harmful effects on society and livelihoods and also on regional economics. And these are all the types of issues and problems at IOV that we're trying to solve. So when I spoke about the complexity of that supply network and the fact that it crosses loads of borders, this implies that there are multiple parties and many, many stakeholders involved. And typically in situations like that become question marks or a bit of uncomfort with the level of trust. Take this webinar, for example, or the fact that we're all interacting all the time online these days. Do you really know who it is that you're interacting with and what data exists about me? Who can see that data? How is it being used? These are all really, really important questions that IOV 42 is trying to solve. And I think it's also important to say, as a technology designer and provider, we're super aware that technology is not a silver bullet here. It is not going to solve all of these problems. This is a huge puzzle with many, many different pieces, and it will take everything coming together to solve those. What you'll see on this slide might be a little bit confusing because we've already spoken a bit about blockchain, but IOV is not blockchain in the very purest sense of the word, and I'll come on to that. Rather, we describe ourselves as being inspired by blockchain, but with really fundamental differences in the technology and in the structure of it there. The reason why we've done it a bit differently is to try and overcome some of the challenges that traditional blockchains face. Those challenges are things like, really, how do you scale? So how can technology increase its performance without detrimentally impacting the environment and causing big question marks about security and privacy? So that's one of the main challenges that we've tried to solve here. The last thing to say about the project before going on to the technology characteristics is that the partnership with PBN and Carl Ronnow has been a lot of fun. So thank you. I really look forward to our weekly catch-up calls that we have. We've learned a huge amount throughout the process, and it's been a really caring and friendly partnership, which has been critical to this. PBN in particular is fundamental to what we're trying to do. Why is that? Well, they bring a huge amount of trust into the process. As an endorser, as a verifier, a certifier, we're really fortunate that they're highly forward thinking and keen to experiment around things, but also that they provide a lot of reputation. by PBN endorsing and providing stamps of truth and saying this isn't rubbish data going into a system because we've endorsed it, we've certified it, it provides a lot of accountability and integrity as to the data that's in there. And that's really what the plan is moving forward, to think about how we can scale this to more reputable organizations. So that's background to the project. We're going to give you a quick taster. You're in for a treat. My colleague Chris is going to give you a very high level overview of the technology. Important to say what it is not, and this is where I'll address that point around us not being a purist blockchain. First of all, it is not fully anonymous, completely open and viewable to everyone. This is a very carefully curated network that's permissioned. This is very important and comes back to the point about reputation. The second thing that we're not is tied to this idea that often when we hear the word blockchain, we think about Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, which have their place and their purpose, but we are not tied to Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. The reason I'm pointing that out is there is a lot of news and press around how much energy these type of tokens and assets might be consuming. And in fact, our technology has been designed from the start to be far, far less energy consuming than what traditionally exists. So that's what we're not. In terms of the more defining characteristics, you'll often hear the word immutability. And what we mean by that is a historical and live record of data or information that is stored forever. Now, some people can be a bit challenged by that, but in fact, what we mean is if there are any changes to even a single dot or a pixel in the data, that is flagged up. You're able to see what data has been changed, when, and importantly, by whom. So that provides accountability. And we think particularly in high-risk commodities, it helps minimize any incentives to manipulating data that might be in there. The second and really important thing that lies at the heart of what we're trying to do is this idea of decentralization or distribution. What this means is there is not one single organization owning and controlling all of the data and all of the participants. The more that this scales to reputable organizations and the more that it grows, the more trust there will be in there. The other way of looking at this is that if it was not decentralized, we'd face that question around being an organization that is setting the homework as well as marking the homework, which we don't think does anything to deliver greater trust. The third part about what this is it's transparent, but with permissions. So this means that items are very traceable, but you are in control of your data. You can control who sees what, again, rather than it being completely open and viewable. And last but not least, and if you remember one thing about the technology today, I'd hope it's this, it's that we put identity at the heart of this. Identities meaning the organizations or the individuals involved. That can be a timber exporter like Carl Ronnow, or that can be an endorser like PBN. The reason we do this is we have this belief that a lot of traceability solutions as they stand are fantastic at tracking a commodity. They might put QR codes on something, they might tag a shipment of timber, and that has its place, but we don't think that answers the whole question. By putting identity in this, it means you can have a greater degree of trust, because we think you can't trust the asset if you don't trust the identity involved in it. So that's why we're very, very keen to put identity and reputation really at the heart of this. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Chris, who's going to take you through a high-level overview of the timber chain. It's not going to be a deep dive. We want this to be really pragmatic and accessible. If you do have questions, we would love to hear them. So please do write them and we'll try and address them at the end. If they're super specific or relevant to your organization, then we might suggest a nice conversation offline about that. So are you ready, Chris?
Yes, thank you, Anna. And it's a pleasure to be presenting to all of you. I'll quickly share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see it now.
Yes.
So, okay, I wanted to first of all, start with a quick overview of the supply chain that we have been working with for this particular project. So we start off with the forest where wood is harvested. It then gets transported to a sawmill where it gets processed and then sent to a drying facility. After the drying process, the timber arrives to the timber exporter facility where it gets rebundled and later shipped to a buyer. Now, we understand that this is just one example of a supply chain, of a timber supply chain. Therefore, we're more than happy to hear your feedback and take it into account for future versions of timber chain. Now, on today's demo, you'll see how the timber exporter can record original stocks, their rebundling and shipment, and how the certifier can review and verify their data. It's also worth mentioning that what you will see today was based on Carl Ronnow's requirements, but may be different for other exporters. As mentioned before, we're super happy to hear your particular requirements and also make sure that timber chain supports them. So without further ado, let's switch to timber chain. Here you can see I have the interface of the timber exporter before me, and it is divided into 4 sections. So the original stock section allows us to record original stocks that arrive to the facility. The rebundle stock section allows us to record how these original stocks are rebundled. And the shipment section, as the name suggests, helps us record shipments. There's also a 4th section, which is really important, is the legal sources section, and allows us to record legal source or any other certificates on the blockchain. And as you can see here, we have one legal source certificate here. And if I click validate, we can check that this information definitely exists on the blockchain and has been endorsed by Preferred by Nature with their digital signature. So now let's briefly look at how things can get recorded on the timber chain. So as a timber exporter, you actually have 2 options. You can either go with recording a new stock and filling in all of the information related to this original stock, and of course, as well as uploading all of the documents related to this. And as you can see here are a few examples of the documents that can be uploaded. There's also the second option, which is importing data, which allows us to basically take an Excel sheet and within an instance, upload all of the existing data that you have in your system or simply in Excel. And let's take a quick look at how an original stock looks like once it has been recorded. So here you can view all of the information about it, all of its documents, and you can also make sure that all of this data is recorded on the blockchain securely. So now we move on to the rebundle stock section where we can actually record a rebundling. Once I click edit, you can see that I have already created a draft with all of the information. Here I can select which particular original stocks are going into this rebundling procedure and will result in rebundle stocks being outputted. This is very important because this allows us to form a chain of how timber was transferred from one state to another or from one entity to another. And then we can also see what is the total volume of the output. Here we can specify what are the rebundle stocks that are being output, and I will intentionally change the amount being more than we had originally to just show you that the system prevents me from doing so. And if I change it back, we can, of course, continue. Now, the last section is the shipment section, and it allows us to record shipments. If I click edit, you can see that here we can select which rebundled stocks are going into this shipment. We can specify the amount of tons, and we can see the total volume. And of course, on the next step, we can record all of the documents that have gone into the shipment. So now I will submit it quickly to the blockchain. So as you can see, now we can view all of the information related to the shipment. We can see which particular rebundled stocks went into the shipment, as for this particular process, only rebundled stocks can be sent into a shipment. And of course, we can view all of the documents attached to this shipment. We can also see here the legal source certificate holder information and the legal source certificate that is associated with the shipment automatically based on the validity period. And here we can also, of course, make sure that it is valid and has been signed, in our case, by Preferred by Nature. We can also validate this information on the blockchain, making sure that all of the information that we see before us hasn't been changed since the time it was recorded. Now, of course, since I recorded it now, it's probably not as relevant as, let's say, 1 year down the road where auditing might occur. Now, of course, we can also share this information with the buyer by generating a link. What is important to mention is that the buyer gets then access to all of the information about the shipment, including the documents, which makes the process of sharing information increasingly efficient. And then they have all of the information. They're also free to check all of this information on the blockchain, making sure that it is stored there securely. Also, a very interesting thing is that we have the history section, which allows us to check all of the rebundled stocks that went into the shipment, and as well as go back to the original stocks. And this enhances the auditing process at the timber exporter's facility. Now, I will switch to the certifier view to show you what the certifier can see. So I log in to the platform. And as you can see, the same sections are presented to us, but instead of being able to input data onto the Timber Chain platform, the certifier can view all of this data. And importantly, let's start with shipments, because this is maybe the starting point to go back as far back to the forest as possible. So as you can see, the certifier has the exact same information available to them, fully transparent about the shipment that we have just recorded. They can review all of the information, they can check all of the documents, and they can validate that this information is indeed stored on the blockchain. And in case they want to approve all of this information, they can click the verify button to sign, to provide a digital signature on the blockchain that they approve this information. And again, as Anna mentioned, if in future some of the documents change, even if 1 pixel basically changes in these documents, the hash would not match. And of course, then the signature would not apply to this changed information. So now we can see the shipment in the verified section. We can click validate and see that it now has the signature of preferred by nature. And this is exactly what the buyer would see. And of course, we can go all the way back to the original stocks to check also that information. So that concludes the demo, and happy to receive your questions.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that demo. Now that we've had a chance to see Timber Chain in action, I'm going to launch another poll for everybody to participate in. And let me also share my screen very quickly. What sort of supply chain due diligence would you be using with this service? The idea of Timber Chain was that it was designed to be relevant to different standards. So because we think this will help it stay relevant to changing regulatory landscape. So we're just very interested to see from the audience how they might envision using this service with the type of certifications they use. Timber Chain also can be used if you use your own internal review processes and standards as well. So it's intended to be very flexible. And that is coming in. And I will quickly end this poll and share the results. So it's a very nice spread of different certification standards that people already use or are looking to use in the future. So thank you everybody for participating. Please continue to share your questions and or comments in the chat feature. Like Anna said, if you have a very technical question about Timber Chain and we run out of time to answer it today, I'm fairly certain that the IOB42 team will be more than happy to address these questions afterward and potentially walk you through a longer demo. So now we're moving on to the part of the webinar where we'll get to chat a bit more with our speakers on their experience with Timber Chain and the benefits that they've seen so far and what they hope the longer term impact of Timber Chain will be. So I'm going to start off with Adam. So Adam, please unmute yourself. Thank you. In your introductory comments, you mentioned what inspired you to work with IOB42 to create this new, more digitized service for your clients. But could you explain a bit more why you decided to work with blockchain-based technology specifically?
Yeah, as I said before, we could see where we can all see how things are developing in the world, and things are coming available. But then also, you know, we work heavily within the certification schemes, and we see how these schemes are evolving and how they're trying to, you know, fix the problems that are becoming more recognized as the market matures. And there are many different ways of doing it, and we're not saying that blockchain is the only way to do it. And we're working in different options, and we're working with the schemes ourselves, and we help them develop and, you know, put in different ways of helping evolve it to where it came from, where it is. But blockchain we see as another solution to this, and it would be remiss of us not to explore, you know, the options of this and see what it can actually do and what ways it can fix some of the issues that we are seeing in the brand-based, paper-based, you know, centralized systems that we work in. But we're not saying, as we hope this presentations have said today, we're not saying we throw all of those out. Well, in actually the reverse, we're hoping this accelerates certification, accelerates improved supply chain management and sourcing and source management. Layering another blockchain on top of this will help us focus on some of the things that we really need to focus on. Because, you know, preferred by nature, if you ask everyone in the group, we're either agriculturalists or forestry. You know, I'm a forester, and that's what we want to focus on. We want to focus on certifying new resources and working down upstream as much as possible, and not necessarily focusing on, you know, chain of custody certificates, which is primarily a lot of our work. And if there's a solution that we can reduce the amount of effort that we put there with trust as well, then we can really focus on what we should all be focusing on, is the resources.
Thank you, Adam, for answering that first question. My follow-up question would be, what would you say to your clients or colleagues who may be skeptical of adopting a new service that leverages blockchain?
Yeah, you know, that's fully understandable. You know, in the past, again, with all new technologies, you know, a couple of years ago that came on, and it happened in the past with DNA and other things. You know, there's a certain amount of hubris and excitement, and then there's this people, the promises initially made aren't met. But you know, I think the sector's improved. It's matured to a level where I think, you know, companies like IOV42 are seeing where the gaps are and seeing where things could actually be put in to help augment the systems we have already. So again, we're stressed, you know, this isn't with blockchain, that's great, everything goes by the by. What we're saying, we certify, we audit, we verify, but we also use blockchain along. It's not just a silver bullet where everything gets dropped, but we're bringing this together to work in the systems we already work in, but also stress, you know, create a network of participants. So, you know, if people are keen to learn more or looking to develop this themselves, even, you know, Soil Association, SCS, if you want to come to me and talk about it, I'm open to that, to explore ways we can work together, because these things will only evolve and grow as fast as a network can grow. So I'm happy to open to everyone to please come and speak to me if you wish to learn more about how we did it and what we think it.
Thank you for that, Adam, and for kind of putting out the open call to other organizations. I think it's important to emphasize here that, like you said, TimberChain or any kind of blockchain application isn't meant to be some magic solution, but what it does offer is an added layer of trust, transparency, and security to existing infrastructure. So although this may kind of modernize or at least digitize some processes to different extents, depending on the organization, it sets up these organizations for long-term success in an industry that's trying to balance complying with mounting regulations while still making profits. So
yeah, and I think that trust, you know, ideally we set up different nodes on different blockchains, and as Chris has just showed, you know, all the information flows through with each product, each stick of timber. So whatever you buy, you'll have all the history of it, you'll have the data, you'll have the documentation, And as long as it's verified and through a reputable group that everyone agrees, and conversion factors are agreed along the line, which we've done, that trust then flows down through the supply chain.
Exactly. So thank you so much, Adam. And I'll let you relax for now until the question and answer session at the end. And I will move over to Dick from Carl Ronnow to get more of a trader's perspective. So hello, Dick, welcome.
Hello there, hello everyone. Good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are.
So could you please give us a bit more of a background on who Carl Ronnow is and what you all do?
Sure, okay, so for those that don't know us, we've been a timber trader for over 30 years, primarily in hardwoods, but sort of more recently, we've been sourcing from temperate areas as well. And we've also started supplying veneer and plantation logs to add to the sawn timber that we've traditionally offered into the marketplace. We've kind of always tried to be at the forefront of new legislation and market requirements. And so we've held FSC, COC certification since 2003, MTCS, PFC certification since 2009. And currently we're the only company, I think, in Malaysia that has the preferred by nature legal source certification.
Great. So what convinced you to join the Timber Chain Proof of Concept project with Preferred by Nature and IOB 42?
Well, at Carl Ronnow, we're always on the lookout for ways to increase the security, kind of the credibility of the due diligence that we can offer to our buyers. We kind of see our role, we're trying to manage the risk of illegality on behalf of our buyers, but we can do it closer to the source because we're closer to the forest and we're geographically closer, to the forest and geographically closer to, our suppliers, the downstream, such as sawmills, etc. For about 15 years, I suppose now we've been working with forest owners and downstream manufacturers, firstly advising them to, to get certified, but also helping some of those suppliers to implement the systems that will enable them to get certified. Initially this was in the Southeast Asia area, but in the last 5 or 6 years, we've started doing work with mainly in Gabon and helping suppliers there. But we kind of realized one of the main challenges our industry really faces is this managing of supply chain information. And we kind of saw blockchain really, storing this supply chain information onto a secure digital database, maybe as a way of meeting this challenge. And when Adam first contacted me about 10 months ago, I wasn't really sure, I said, do you want to join this project with IOB 42, this proof of concept project? I wasn't convinced that our stock system was set up for it, but we thought, let's give it a go. Why not? Always happy to try new things. And actually, the experience has helped us to really reorganize the way we manage our information. So it's kind of the blockchain side apart, it's been quite beneficial anyway.
So Dick, you just said that when Adam first reached out to you, you were a little skeptical maybe about the project. So since then, could you talk a bit more or shed some light on whether or not implementing Timber Chain has been difficult, or what has the experience been like?
Well, not really. I mean, we've really been working on it for 10 months, but I suppose, no disrespect to you guys at IOB 42, but you were new to timber supply chains, new to timber certification when we started the project. But your technical teams work really hard, and it's obvious they have a much greater grasp really of timber supply chains and certification now. And we've started off really small as well. So to begin with, this blockchain that's been created is on Timber Chain. We're only going to upload shipments of PFC legal source certified product from Malaysia. We'll start with that. Then we'll just kind of see the feedback we get from buyers, the feedback we get from banks and other people, and, depending on that, I could see us adding maybe products from other areas into different markets sometime in the near future.
That's really exciting. So while we kind of wait to hear about the feedback, just from your perspective, what are the sort of perceived benefits to Carl Ronnow and your clients in regards to managing your supply chain data with TimberChain?
I suppose, firstly, it really allows us to offer different buyers, and they all have different levels of due diligence they require. We can kind of give each one what they actually need, and with individual companies, it's really up to them to decide what level of due diligence they require under legislation such as the EUTR or the UK timber regulation, different countries seem to have different interpretations of what's required, and even different companies in those countries have different interpretations of what they think is required. So if we upload all of the due diligence information we can provide for anyone's shipment onto this secure platform, then each buyer can decide to take as much or as little due diligence information, as they think that they require themselves. Previously for each shipment, we had to create a portfolio of documents for each individual buyer based on what they need. And now with this blockchain, this timber chain, because we'll upload all the documents, whether they're, transport documents or bills of lading or whatever like that, they'll all be securely stored on the blockchain. So we can, just give each client access to their own, to this information by giving them the decryption key, this link that Chris showed at the time of shipping, and then they can go back and review the information relevant to their shipment. Okay, I suppose it's really quite important at the moment to make clear that what we're doing with TimberChain and putting onto the blockchain, it's something that's being added to our wood product that's already PFC certified, and it already is legal source certified. So, we're not seeing this TimberChain as a standalone due diligence tool, but rather one that's being added to make an existing one more secure, more credible, more transparent, and, we hope, depending on the feedback we get, it'll lead to, greater level of buyer confidence and hopefully more sales, more market share. That's really what we hope. But, I suppose, lastly, really, I think we believe it's really important to, we can show our buyers, demonstrate to them that we're being as transparent as possible, So, because we are going to upload all of the due diligence for a shipment onto this secure digital database, and once we put that information on there, we can't change it, we kind of feel that could be quite a strong indication that we're actually doing that we're being as transparent as we possibly can. So that's really, that's the benefits. Hopefully there'll be more.
Great, thank you so much, Dick. First of all, hats off to you and the folks at Carl Ronnow for being so open to piloting the service and really being a crucial industry voice in developing the service. And we all look forward to checking back in with you to see how TimberChain is going for Carl Ronnow. Fantastic, thank you very much. Thank you. So now let's look a bit more at the technology. Anna, TimberChain is not the first blockchain-related chain of custody solution out there. What's different about TimberChain?
Yeah, good question. It's one that we're asked a lot. I can see actually in the questions, which are great. Please keep them coming. Frederica Malt has asked about an FSC blockchain technology project. And we are not super knowledgeable about that. We're very much looking forward to hearing more about it. I think it's very, very encouraging. We're so happy that FSC are doing that and their belief that this is the future. I think there are a few differences between what exists, what has come before. And again, this is not an in-depth, not working knowledge of every single technology that's out there. First is TimberChain is ready now. So it's ready to help different organizations, whether you are within the supply chain yourself, you're an importer, you're an exporter, you're a manufacturer, or whether you are an endorser to the network. So it might be like a certifier like Adam, or you could be a science-based traceability solution that's endorsing the validity of a product. So that's very exciting for us. We're really proud that it's live. The second difference is that now the name might be a little bit misleading here, calling it TimberChain. It's actually built on a platform that is completely agnostic to commodities. So one of the plans moving forward is to explore how the same platform could be used for other complex commodities such as biofuels or palm oil or cotton, for instance. So that's something that we're looking at the moment. I think something else that might be unique, but I'm not entirely sure, is that it's also agnostic to the standards. So I think there are some questions relating to that as well. And you mentioned it earlier, Chiara, where we've built it specifically to flex to changing industry landscapes and to try and make that easier. And then the fact that it's decentralized that I mentioned earlier. I think to Frederica's question around it being very different and it would be a hassle to work with different blockchains, completely agree. We don't think that there will be one blockchain to rule them all. And that's where integration and interoperability become really, really important. And just to repeat a point we made earlier, we're not saying that existing systems need to be halted and you need to implement something new. This is meant to lie underneath and integrate very seamlessly with existing systems. So hopefully that answers the question.
Definitely. Thank you, Anna. I had a slightly related question, which is, can other participants be involved in TimberChain, or is this closed to Preferred by Nature and or Carl Ronnow clients?
Do you want me to answer that or Adam? I'll go. Okay. Yeah, I don't think we'd be living up to the name of a distributed ledger technology if this wasn't distributed and decentralized to many, many stakeholders. The more reputable organizations that become part of this, the more trust we build into the whole value network, which is something we're really, really excited to do. So yes, big or small organizations who are already very technologically forward, or organizations who are maybe dipping their toes in that water, everyone is welcome to have a conversation with us to understand what it might mean for you as an organization to be involved in this. I think we do have some very important things to think about when it comes to who hosts the nodes, so who is going to be hosting and managing and operating some of that information, because that again has huge implications for reputation of this. But yes, we're very, very keen to expand this up and down the supply chain to other commodities as well.
Thank you so much, Anna. So I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to wrap up this portion right now and get us ready for the question and answer session. But before we do that, I just wanted to quickly go over how, trying to share my screen, how organizations can get involved or learn more. So in the next few days, everybody that has signed up for today's webinar will receive a follow-up email with a recording of this webinar, a link to a pre-recorded longer demonstration of the TimberChain, Preferred by Nature's official TimberChain webpage, where you can read an overview of the service and make further inquiries, and information about a second TimberChain webinar, which is currently scheduled for August 25th, and it is geared towards audiences based in the Americas, just by the timing. And we will be sharing a copy of these slides as well. Timber Chain is live, and as the speakers have mentioned before, it can and will be expanded to include other commodities. So if you're ready to leverage Timber Chain to secure your supply chains and empower your clients, please don't hesitate to reach out. As I said, an email will be going out shortly, but in the meantime, you are welcome to reach out to our speakers, and I will share some useful links in the chat shortly for you to explore more about IV42 and Preferred by Nature and Carl Ronnow. So with that, I am going to start the question and answer session. We've been getting a lot of really good questions coming in from the audience, so thank you so much. It may be the case that we run over slightly, but like I said, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar afterward. And of course, if you have any questions that don't get directly answered today, you are more than welcome to reach out to us or respond to the follow-up email that we will be sending around in the next few days. So I'm just going to jump right in. So one of the questions that we got from Patricia was, how can Timber Chain be customized for a company's specific use? Anna, do you think you could take this question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Patricia. Thank you, Chiara. Yeah, so we're trying to find a balance, Patricia, between customizing for an individual organization's specific requirements and having something that meets particular standards. So we're really lucky to have worked with Carl Ronnow and other organizations who we haven't mentioned in trying to design this, because we think the way it's set up best serves organizations who are aiming and striving to be best in class in terms of their compliance and their etc. So we don't want to customize anything in a way that would bring it down to a lower common denominator, but rather ensure that those great actors in the system, the participants who are most compliant, get rewarded and are able to be part of this as frictionless and as low cost as possible. But yes, naturally, as we go up and down the supply chain, there will be needs to customize for the nuances of each part of the supply chain there. Typically, what the process involves is a conversation, and we would model out, we'd try and understand exactly the data flows that you have, and then we'd give you a test environment to see how relevant it is to what you're doing today, and then have a conversation about what might need to be changed and how relevant that is for the system as a whole. So hopefully that answered it, Patricia.
Thank you, Anna. We have another question, and this is more about the functionality of Timber Chain, and potentially Chris can hop in to answer this, but can the system account for offcuts and waste and things like that happening in the production, resulting in the volumes changing or being changed to other products such as wood chips?
Yeah, so as I have demonstrated in the rebundling procedure, you can select which original stocks are going into the rebundling procedure, but in case the output is less volume than was available from the original stocks, we are recording this also on the blockchain. So the difference will be recorded in our case currently as discarded timber, but we do realize that it may be used for other products, so we can easily switch that to be, later bundled into other products.
I just jump in there, and yeah, that's part of the certification process as well. That we work with Carl Ronnow and others that through the process and the verification of auditing, the conversion factors and the waste are agreed, and so the parameters will be set on the system on that agreed conversion, and so the system then picks up any falling inside or outside of those parameters on the conversion against the certification.
Great, thank you, Adam. We have a question from Sanjay, and it's about the implementation of the service in a domestic market. So he says, most of the systems render services to the export of timber products, and they don't necessarily account for glitches in the local supply chain. So how do we account for these sort of these not disconnects, but the difference between a kind of local supply chain and a longer term international supply chain? Perhaps Anna?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sanjay. Yeah, and completely understand that in certain countries there is a huge national market as well for this. So the import and export step multiple times in a supply chain adds to the complexity, but we're not bound by this at all. And so it absolutely could be applied in the domestic market as well. I think important to note that the platform has designed specifically to be as flexible as possible to what is a very varied and also constantly evolving market. So yeah, I'd be really interested to think through what it would mean for a national market, but I don't think it would be, I think it would be quite straightforward. Yeah.
Okay, Anna, while I kind of have you on the mic, more or less, there's a slightly related question from George, and that is, how do we deal with this, the quote unquote Oracle problem, connecting the physical and the digital world? Are there checks in place for data input?
Yeah, so here what the phrase that comes to mind is if you put rubbish into the system, not only are you going to get rubbish out, but many different organizations are going to be handling a lot of rubbish there. So there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle. And this is why the identity bit is critical, because we're not just tracking the asset, we're tracking the identity involved. We hold the people who are inputting data here accountable. So that's one factor that really, really helps. Then you have layered over the top of this, which we hope is quite unique, the involvement of the auditors and the certifiers. So that again endorses and stamps, this probably isn't a rubbish piece of data there. And moving forward, we're having some really interesting conversations about including other data sources like government surveys, risk analysis, satellite data, etc. And all of this is to say that we want to have as many pieces of the puzzle and stamps of trust and endorsement of the data as possible, to show when it gets to that furthest point downstream that the organizations have done everything in their power possible to prove that what they're doing is all above board and compliant.
Thank you, Anna. I think that answers several questions that are coming in that are slightly similar, which are asking, how do we trust this data? How can we kind of hold the people who are importing data, how can we hold them accountable for the information that they're uploading? So I hope that answers the question for people who have these kind of related questions, which are very important, because the idea, of course, is to increase the security and trust of the system. I would like to hand it over potentially to Adam with a question about how, maybe this is for Adam and also Anna, but I'll ask the question first. How can we connect TimberChain to more complex supply chains or move, I guess, up and down the supply chain? For example, with a supply chain that has lots of small holders.
Anna, do you want to talk about the technology, or I can talk from our side? We work as all the other auditing groups do, up and down the supply chain, auditing different nodes. So as we're working through one manufacturer or forest to manufacturer, obviously we'll audit against whatever scheme or what internal system are put in place. So that is an ongoing, and none of that will change in any way. There's always going to be a requirement to have some oversight if there's claims, environmental or social claims against any product that goes through the supply chain. So that goes back to the data going in. There's always going to be a requirement for check and verification of data. And TimberChain will go across. If the whole supply chain is using TimberChain, then great, and then the whole thing will be moved across downstream using the same system. And then the tech side of it, if there's another blockchain picking up something else, I'll leave that to Anna and her team to fully understand. I don't.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, because Actually, the extra value or the real value add comes in the more complex, non-linear supply chains. And the question around involvement of smallholders, we know will be critical when it comes to other commodities such as rubber or palm oil. So we have in our roadmap the idea of an identity wallet for the individual smallholder farmers, or at an aggregated cooperative level to be involved in this. We're also very keen to hear ideas. We don't think that we have all of the perfect answers to this. So Johan, who asked the question, if you're asking it with a particular background in mind, then please do let us know. I just wanted to answer one question very quickly from Merrill, who asked whether everyone can see the whole supply chain or can it be restricted. That's really important. It's permissioned, which means you are in control, Merrill, of which organizations can see which part of what data in your supply chain. It's not a free-for-all. We know that this is going to have confidential, competitive information in it, and we want you to be in control of that, not some system out there that you don't know who's seeing stuff.
Yeah. All right, can I just break into smallholders as well? It's a really good point Anna made there, and we've modelled out, what this looks like going to resources. I said earlier on, this hopefully reduces the burden for us in terms of effort on supply chain, so we can focus at source. And so we are working with groups who call themselves, the first mile and digitization of smallholders and resources, because you've got to get the data in the blockchain. That's the end goal for us, is to be able to work at source with smallholders, digitizing all our data. And there's many groups that are doing that. And so the data is there ready to be used. And the groups that I spoke to, they're finding it difficult to get the data back up into the supply chains and downstream to the consumers. So that's why one of the reasons the interest in timber chain and blockchain is to grab that data and work with the first mile digitization of smallholders, and then bring that data along the supply chain so buyers can use it. And the end goal then will be able to, the buyers, wherever they are in the supply chain, can interact directly with the smallholders. And that's the end goal, I would have thought.
Thank you, Anna and Adam, for answering that question. We have a slightly related question from Oksana, and it's about convincing other organizations, whether they're upstream or downstream, to use timber chain. We're still early days, so we probably will have more data points on that later. But if Dick or Adam could speak a little bit about, how you've overcome trying to convince your colleagues and, clients and or buyers around using timber chain. I'll let Dick answer first.
Do you want me to say something first? I'll
Yeah,
jump in
sure.
before Adam. I think certainly from our point of view, most things are market driven, so it has to be the people that we're selling to that have a need or a requirement for this. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this initial phase is going to go, and how our buyers and their buyers receive it and what benefit they see, with it. I remember, going not that too many years back to chain of custody certification, whether FSC or PFC, or, it was very, very difficult to convince upstream people, to become involved. But something like the EUTR came along, and that kind of changed that. It made it there was legislation. You had to do due diligence to demonstrate, minimal risk of illegality. So, certification was one way to go towards improving your due diligence and showing it in a certain way. So I think if we get traction from our markets for this, it will then be easier to get other people to convince them to become involved, because if it leads to more business, then that, they find that very interesting.
Definitely. Adam, do you have any follow-up points on your own experience with Preferred by Nature?
Experience, I would have thought hope. I think not hopes experience yet, because brand new to leverage it back into the supply chains. But as an auditor, we don't have so much control of pushing things through, as much more market reactive. But the hope is, as Dick says, if you get one node in the supply chain, this, and then you can see people, the buyers and others can see that the ease of the transfer of data and trust goes along the supply chain, then it would be a natural thing for them to do is just roll it on into their supply chains. And if you're certifying against a scheme that's global, there's no reason then it can't just be rolled straight in. So if we're certifying one part of the supply chain and then someone wants to take the blockchain, timber chain further on down, then the next certification group can just grab that and take it down through the supply chain. I can see that working. Or if it's a second party certification group, then buyers can then just grab it and put it through their supply chain pretty easy. Again, with the change in the timber chain for different manufacturing processes. That would be the aim and the hope for as this would go forward.
I might just add, because I know we're a few minutes over, and thanks everyone for staying on the call actually. If I might just add two things about that, how do you convince and create that behavioral change? People typically don't trust and don't engage with things that they don't understand. So there is a huge uphill battle in the blockchain and the tech sector as a whole on educating and informing people so that they have correct data points to make decisions. Then the second thing, the bit that I'm nerdily very excited about over the summer, is conducting what we call a proof of impact study. So working with PBN and Carl Ronnow and different stakeholders to understand very tangible and practical metrics of how has this actually changed their working life? How has it made things easier? How has it changed their terms with their customers or suppliers, for instance? So hopefully we'll have some interesting data points to prove that what we're doing is working, that we'll be able to share with you another time, hopefully.
Thank you, Anna, for those extra comments. I know we're running over, so I wanted to say a few things. First, that we're getting lots of good questions that are really relevant. So in the follow-up communications, we will send a list of the kind of really important questions that have come through and with answers as well, so that we can make sure that everyone feels a bit more familiar with the service. And of course, if you have any follow-up questions, you are more than welcome to reach out to us individually and ask them as well, because we're happy to share more information about the service. Before I kind of wrap up, there was one really, I think, valuable question that we should answer while we still have a good amount of people on the call, which is, do we have a test version for potential new users? Because I think a lot of people are curious about testing it out and understanding the implications around pricing and project pipeline management. Potentially Chris or Anna?
Yeah.
Okay,
we
thanks.
definitely have a test environment set up currently where you can upload test data, of course, not any personal data, just to be sure. So you can upload it, test it, play around with the system, and make sure that this is something that fits your needs. And definitely after you have checked it, we're super keen to hear your feedback and improve the system as much as possible.
Thank you, Chris. I think maybe, shall we squeeze in one last question and then I will definitely wrap up. There are just lots of good questions coming in. And I think this is more about the data, which I think people, when we talk about immutability, for example, around blockchain, it gets people thinking about, well, what happens if you actually accidentally upload wrong information? This question comes from Frederica. So perhaps Anna or Chris, could you please address this question, which is, what if you make a mistake uploading information? Human error, of course, is not going to be eliminated by blockchain.
Yeah, of course. So basically what we're doing on the blockchain is we're recording claims of information. So for example, you claim that this original stock arrived with this number on this date with this volume. And well, things happen and you entered a mistake, some wrong data. Therefore, in case this data has not been endorsed by anyone, checked by anyone, you're free to create another claim, because you cannot just delete the previous claim. This is blockchain. Everything is stored for ages. And of course, this is just a hash of data, so no one would get to see, the original data behind it. So you simply create a new claim and then have a third party verify it to make sure that someone has checked it and someone approves this data. So there's no issue if a mistake has been entered.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. And I think we'll kind of close it out at that because we are about 10 minutes over. And like I said, we will answer or we'll send a list of kind of frequently asked questions about the service. Before I wrap it up, do any of the speakers have any final closing words before we say goodbye?
Just say thanks to everyone for joining the webinar and the interest. It's great participation. I really appreciate it. And again, I stress if anyone wants to reach out to me directly and discuss some of the issues, I'm more than happy to do that.